It is finally time. We are pulling in our 1993 GMC Jimmy. We're gonna get all this stuff moved out of our way. We're gonna finagle this Jimmy in here lengthwise, and then we're gonna take a perfectly good running and driving vehicle and cut it to pieces. It's time to get those axles underneath of it that we've been hanging on to for a while now. Parts are finally starting to show up. It's time to quit putting it off. We're bringing it in, we're cutting it up. We want this thing cool and we want it now. So let's get that thing in here. Now, if you guys are unfamiliar with this vehicle, then go back and watch the videos. What are you even doing? Let me catch you up to speed. This is our 1993 GMC Jimmy that we picked up pretty cheap because it didn't run and drive all that great. Did a few things to it, fixed a lot of stuff on it, did some maintenance. She's not perfect, but she's getting there. Now, the whole purpose of this sweet ride is because we have a Scout that we're trying to build to be our off-road rig, but it's a long ways off, and I want something we can go out in now, and it has some creature comforts. Landed on the GMC Jimmy. Now, this bad girl's got just about everything we could want in it. Cruise control, air conditioning, all the power options, and so far, for the most part, all of those work. Now, all that being said, we did take her out, kicked the four-wheel drive in, and had a little fun with it in its stock form. But now it's time to get down to business. I picked up a set of Jeep Dana 30 and 35 axles front and rear for this thing. Now listen, I know they're not Dana 60s, but that is not the vision I have for this thing. Cheap, lightweight. I've had quite a few Dana 30s underneath some rigs that I've not treated nicely, and they've surprised me. They've held up. So I'm rolling with it. The whole vision behind this rig is 35-inch tires and pretty light abuse on off-road. So I'm comfortable taking the gamble on a Dana 30 in the front and a Dana 35 in the rear, and there's a lot of aftermarket that I can throw at it to do, say, C-clip eliminators in the rear, truss the front so we don't got to worry about anything bending. Now, the beauty of those axles is they were cheap, and that is what I'm all about on this vehicle. How much money do we have to spend to have a capable, comfortable off-road vehicle? Now, what's cool about this square body Jimmy from the 90s, it's still got an old school steering setup on it that I think I can make work with that front axle, as well as it's got a full frame underneath of it. Enough talking though, let's get this thing jacked up and on some jack stands, fire the torch up, and start cutting all the guts out of underneath of her, all the IFS. We're gonna keep the leaf springs in the rear. We'll just do a flip and do a leaf over in the rear axle and just run the factory what it's got back there, and I think it'll do all right. But let's get to cutting. So I'd consider this whole front end junk. I'm not reusing any of it. So I'm gonna drain the brake fluid, maybe unhook a couple things, but for the most part, I'm gonna fire this torch up and turn all of this metal into liquid and get it out of my way so I can see the big picture. Good thing I just cleaned the floors. first for last. Woo! That's a whole lot of weight pulled out of there. Oh gosh. Oh, didn't know those came out of there. Shop! Yeah! Ah! Finally. Okay, not bad for half day's work. We got the front end out of there. It was a little harder than I expected, but it's out. A lot of the torching is done. We're gonna have a lot of cutting and grinding on that front end. Rear end, we have not done a whole lot on the rear end. So in the next day or two, that'll be our main focus. Let's clean up the frame rails in the front, get that ready to start figuring out where we want that. We had a pretty good day yesterday getting the front end all ripped out of this thing. Now to account for the weather this morning, it's pretty cold and I'd rather not have the doors open, try to keep myself a little bit more comfortable today. So I think I'm gonna turn my attention to the rear of the vehicle because that's more of an unbolt and take it out scenario. So we're gonna start pulling some of the hardware in the rear end, drop that rear axle out of it, and then maybe we can grab the new rear axle that's going in it and start measuring out some spring perches and getting those on there. Just kind of be nice to not be running the torch and smoking myself out inside of here. Actually hang on to this rear end. It's kind of cool. It's a short, narrow S-10 heavy duty rear end, and it's called a G80 axle, and it has a posi track locker type setup in it. Kind of neat. I think I'm just gonna hang on to it because it might come in handy on one of our other smaller body projects that we got roaming around here. Okay, here's our rear axle, our nice and lightweight Dana 35. I know C-clip axle, might eliminate it later, but I'm okay with it. I'm good with it. I can sleep at night with it. Anyways, these spring perches are not the right width, and these shock mounts are not gonna do either. So let's go ahead and get these stripped down, get these spring perches off. I've got a new set of anti-wrap spring perches, so we'll get this nice and clean looking, and then we'll roll it underneath of there, put our spring perches on, make sure I like my pinion angle, and then we can kind of tack our perches in place on where we want them, and then we're pretty much set. Go ahead and clip these out of my way. Tired of fighting with them. Oh, God. Okay, I'm pretty close to center on my spring perches, or what I think is center. I'll take a couple more measurements to just be absolutely certain. But I'm gonna make a little mark about where my perches are at. And then I can kind of reference that when I, if I'm changing, because I still gotta set my pinion angle. So we'll just mark these about where we think they should be. And I can erase that if that's wrong later, but I'm just gonna use that in case I accidentally bump something or move something. I kind of can reference that to get it back close to where I was at. Okay, after doing a ton of measurements, I think I'm where I need to be as far as my degrees on the pinion angle and side to side. Pinion not being centered on the axle, I'm picking and choosing places to measure from, but I think we got her there. I think she's where she needs to be. We'll tack these spring perches in place before we totally burn them into the ground. We'll just double check it once we tack it, make sure we definitely like it. One thing I did just notice while messing with this rear end, and I had a jack under the pinion. That's not good. Got some slop in the yoke, so I don't know, I'll have to take a look at what's going on. I couldn't imagine that I'd be lucky enough that it's just loose. I don't know. Okay, all the diff cover bolts were loose. There's no fluid in this thing, no gasket, which I was just assuming it had fluid in it. Let's inspect this thing. Make sure we don't have nothing crazy going on. Spider gears definitely have seen better days. Got some chipping going on. Well, I'm definitely in a quarrel. Shape of the rear axle got me a little worried. Now, I did plan on changing the gear set out, as well as maybe doing like larger spline axles, locker, all that stuff. But I didn't plan on doing it right now. A lot of our budget at the moment is spent on axles, wheels and tires, and suspension. So this is a problem. This is an issue. Now, we are cruising along decently well on this project considering what we've run into. Front end is all stripped out, rear end is out. And honestly, the rear axle is going fairly smooth as far as getting it back in there. Now, of course, we have already ran into some hiccups. One, I've got issues with getting parts here in time, and the rear axle has me questioning just a little bit on what route we should go. Honestly, I think I might just tighten up that pinion yoke and we're just gonna run it. Now, the only reason I would do something like that is because I already plan on changing gears and everything else in the future. So I am not too worried about taking the risk of taking this thing out and having a problem with that rear axle. So with that said, let's get that rear axle put into this thing. We've got a ton of other stuff that we've got to get accomplished as far as still setting up shocks and suspension and drive lines and all that other stuff. So let's save the time, save the money, get the rest of that ironed out, and keep moving forward until we see that finish line. We can double back and change and fix things like that down the road once this thing is back on its own weight. We're gonna keep cramming on this thing. We got more videos to come, and it is gonna be a killer little ride. I got faith in this thing. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and make sure to click that subscribe button, and don't forget to go check us out on Instagram @overrevved. Thanks for watching.